Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I would like to welcome my guest today. With me is Marcus Aurelius Anderson, who's a leadership and executive catalyst, TEDx and international keynote speaker, author of The Gift of Adversity, host of Acton on Verba podcast, winner of Arete Syndicate Create a Positive Impact Award. David Marlow, also known as the Ikigai Guy and the Versatile Guru, is a coach, speaker, and author who helps people live into their purpose and helps companies bring their purpose to their products and their people. And Jason Todd is a serial entrepreneur who empowers others through insightful books, engaging talks, and over 500 podcast episodes. He partners with founders, guiding them to business growth, personal fulfillment, and a sustainable, successful future. Thank you all for being with me today.
Glad to be here.
And here is our topic. I was getting off a plane after a trip to the East Coast when a neighbor on the same flight offered me a ride home. I heard him call his son-in-law, whom he told to meet us at Departures. Why having him come to Departures, I asked. There's less traffic there, he replied. It's easier to get in and out quickly. I immediately felt uncomfortable. Kantian ethics teaches us to project from the individual to the universal. What if everyone used the same trick to avoid traffic? By adding to the congestion at Departures, we'd be making it harder for departing passengers to get to their flights. I considered saying something, but he had already hung up the phone. He was doing me a favor, and I questioned whether he would take my objections to heart. However, reflecting that catastrophic ethical blindness often begins with tiny moral compromises, I regretted not speaking up. We should set our ethical standards higher, both for ourselves and because when others see us cutting ethical corners, we give them license to take similar shortcuts, thereby contributing to the erosion of ethical sensitivity in our society. So, to what degree should we apply the same standards we set for ourselves to others? Should we speak up in defense of them? And if we do, how do we avoid sounding sanctimonious or, in this case, ungrateful? The floor is open.
Cyclonius. I've never heard that word before, so I'm gonna have to look it up.
Holier than thou.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, very good. Very good. Ah.
Even as a rabbi, I don't get to do that.
No. All right. It's interesting you use the word should, right? Should, and that's always an interesting word. In fact, I've tried to eliminate should from my vocabulary just in my life. Like I should do this, I should do that, I should have been better, I should have been better prepared, I should know what that word meant, right? I mean, we have a lot of should. So when we're looking at should, I always take a step back and go, well, should I? And why should I? So it's always a trigger word to me.
Isn't that what ethics is all about, though? I mean, legality is what I have to do or what I can't do.
Well, is it
what I should do?
The right thing to do for sure, but should to me has different connotations than what is the right thing.
How about ought? Is that better?
Maybe. Yeah, the other thing I thought about. Oh no, go ahead, Marcus.
No, please, David.
Well, so one thing I spent 30 years or more in continuous improvement, and that's where I got the aversion to should, and I cannot tell you how many times people who develop products or customer service teams would say, well, the client should or shouldn't do this or that, and what I would always tell them is to look for the workaround, because workarounds are telling you something. If people are going, for example, to the Departures because it's too crowded in arrivals, yeah, we can argue, and we should, whether there we go, whether that is the right thing to do or not. the key thing though in going forward though is why are they doing that? And what is there a system problem? Is there something that's driving that behavior? Is it reinforcing it? It's like in continuous improvement, there's always tells as to gaps in our approach by the workarounds.
Yeah, it reminded me of this story that Simon Sinek tells about the airport. I don't remember which one that they wanted to get the luggage out faster. The people were complaining about waiting for their luggage, and the people were getting from the airplane to the luggage pickup in 3, 4, 5 minutes. It was taking 8 or 9 minutes to get the luggage out. They couldn't speed it up. So what did they do? They redirected the passengers, so it took them 9 minutes to get to the carousel. People would rather be walking than standing around doing nothing. So it's a great example of, I think, what you're pointing out, David. Marcus, what's on your mind?
And this all comes back to intentionality. What am I hoping to accomplish when I have the conversation? If I use a modified Socratic method and I ask a question, what sort of question do I want to ask? Do I want a question in a way that's probing, or do I want to ask a question that's direct? Because if I say, why do you do that? Don't you see how selfish that is? That's not magnanimous. That's more about you, and you're making the things worse. Again, the person may not be receptive to that. But if I pose it as more of this, with this ambiguity, and say, do you think everybody does that? And now maybe they're more receptive using this indirect approach. Maybe having the conversation right then is not the time. Maybe having it later on, maybe having it a week later when you guys are having dinner or having a drink. Maybe having the conversation in a place where there's no emotive components involved, whether it be emotive language or the stress of travel and deadlines, trying to get where we need to go. But understanding why they're doing it, similar to what David said, and then also understanding that there's always a drive, there's always a benefit to why we're doing these things. And if I'm going to be party to it and I'm taking some of that responsibility because I'm getting some of that bonus, that's something else to take into consideration. And I understand that we are playing devil's advocate, and I understand that for some people we may be battling semantics or splitting hairs, but we are having this conversation with that intention to say, listen, this is why it's important. These things that are incremental turn into something monumental if we're not aware of them. So we have to see where there's this incongruency in small spheres of our lives, and then see the compounding effect that it can have long term, with not only to us but other people around us.
Should I share the podcast with a person, or will that come across as passive aggressive?
Exactly.
You know, one of the things that comes to my mind as I listen to this scenario is motivation. Why does a person want to be picked up at departures? And that sends me to the motivation of why is there a sign anyhow that says departures and one that says arrivals? And I can think of at least three things. One is I've got some notes here, convenience for the passengers because of the layout of the facility. So convenience of the passengers, the layout of the facility, which is productivity for the employees. Those are at least three things. Now, there's no prohibition or law that says you must go to departures or arrivals. It is convenience of the passengers, productivity of the employees, and the layout of the facility that facilitates convenience for the passengers and productivity for the employees. I don't think it's also designed for 100% of the circumstances. And I think it's, in this case, at least, it's self-correcting. If the reason you're going to departures is because arrivals is crowded, I think the line that you stated in there, where what happens if everybody does that? In this circumstance, everybody's not going to do that. It's self-correcting. They're only doing that. They would only do that if somehow arrivals was when departures becomes blocked, you'd go down to arrivals. So because there's no prohibition, there's no law, it's designed for convenience. I think in this circumstance, there is a case for if the process of a departure, quickly leaving a car, if that process for your arrival, quickly getting in versus waiting, like what sometimes happens at arrivals, then get it done and get out. Which I get there's the other side of it as well. What happens if everybody does do that? And are you throwing a wrench in everybody else's gears?
You remind me of may have been a TED Talk, I'm not sure. It was talking about the way they design public parks and how they typically put in footpaths, often paved. And then they discover that people are cutting through in different directions because where the designers thought the paths belong were not where the people actually wanted to go to reach their destinations. And so what they're starting to do now apparently is they don't put any footpaths in. They let people go where people go, and they establish the path. I don't know if the same principle would be effective at an airport, but there is this kind of tension between what we think people ought to do for the sake of efficiently and what people are inclined to do themselves.
Yeah, that's why I push back on starting with should, right? And I like both you guys' approaches. It's asking, it's understanding, it's seeing what's driving this. And to your example, Janssen, I mean, that's I think it's Ohio State University has their quadrangle is called an oval, and you have to talk to them why it's called an oval, but it's a quad. But they did that. They let the students just wander on it, and then wherever the main paths were, then they paved it. If you Google it, you'll see it's like this really weird star kind of thing. But it's that same sort of thing. It's like, what do people need to do? What are they driven to do? Why are they doing this? And how can we best meet that? You're right. Why do we have a distinction of arrivals and departures? Is it because the luggage is available here and not here? And all those things. Yeah. Ask the question. To me, that's a huge leap forward and avoids the should and the confrontational aspect of that.
You actually remind me when I was in Japan, which was many years ago, with a student group, and in front of elevators and subway cars, there would be a sort of a yellow stripe section on the right-hand side, and everybody would line up and wait for all of the passengers to get off on the opposite side before they would start getting on. And being with a group of Americans who either didn't realize or didn't care, I sort of stood back and said, "I'm not with them." But there are cues that I think we need to give people to help us as a crowd, which can easily become a mob, be aware of ways of acting that are going to be in everybody's best interest. And then if individuals start taking advantage of that, because now I can game the system, then we cause the whole system to break down. But there does again seem to be this kind of tension.
Part of that tension that I think you just uncovered there is the concept that it can possibly be in everybody's best interest. And I don't think that is true in the micro. What might work out for, David here might in the micro not be perhaps what I perceive my best interest is. Who's to say what the best interest is? So in the macro, then it works out for most people, perhaps. And there's other ways to fix this issue. So in this arrivals departures issue, I think it was Philadelphia airport a number of years ago, I flew into there, and there was absolutely no waiting in departures. If your car was there for 30 seconds, there was somebody ready to give you a ticket. And instead, to minimize the cars that were going through there, they had a whole waiting area, and they demanded that you use that waiting area, which would queue you up. And then, when someone would call you, "Hey, I'm ready to walk out," you would drive up there. And I remember going around that because I was new. It was the first time I'd ever picked anybody up in Philadelphia. And I remember driving around there probably 3 times because I was like, "Oh, are they out yet? Are they out yet? Are they out yet?" So I think part of part of this issue here is an operational issue at the airport and a layout issue. And the departure arrival thing, because there's no law against this, is it really an ethical? I mean, it is an ethical consideration, right? But there's no best for everybody, because what is good for one person is bad for the other. It's just best for most, and figure it out. And if you continue to get congestion, you have a layout issue. You don't have a departures arrival. You don't have a people issue. You got a layout for the people issue.
Doesn't that really speak to the heart of ethics, though? And I mean, you're adding an interesting component, Jason, that there's an ethical consideration in how public areas are designed. Because if they're not competently designed, I mean, my wife teaches middle school, and they were for many years restructuring the building, and they organized a new pickup and drop off process, and all the teachers were convinced it was going to be a disaster, and it turned out to be incredibly efficient, which is refreshing. That the people who built it obviously had studied enough to figure out what actually works and made changes that were not particularly intuitive, but just had come about through trial and error. So there's an ethics involved in design, but there's also an ethics involved in me recognizing that my behavior as an individual, as you say in the micro, is going to have an impact on others. And that if I want to be a member of society, it's not right for me to simply say, I'm going to do what suits me best, because I'm not living on an island in the middle of the Pacific. I'm living with other people, and my actions are going to impact. I mean, take it to an extreme example. We want everybody driving on the same side of the road. Sometimes there might be an advantage for me, but in the long run, it's probably not going to turn out well.
Planes are designed to land on runways, but once in a while, the consideration is plane might need to land on a highway.
Yeah.
And
that's
why I think that the heart of it, I love the word they use there, is consideration, which then is the next level of that consideration is, what do I give consideration to? To what degree am I ethically obligated to go along with your ignorance?
How's ignorance?
So if somebody let's say they laid out the facility poorly, it's a bad facility. Am I ethically obligated to go along with your bad layout? It's a consideration, right?
Well, sure. That's why unethical behavior begets more unethical behavior.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it is the micro. I agree with you. It's the individual consideration and the scope of that consideration, which it's complicated and nuanced, I think.
And Rabbi, you brought something up about when you were in Japan. We talked about this notion of self-awareness. Culturally, there are different forms of self-awareness. There are different levels of it, clearly. And then we look at, again, the logistics, or probable over potential, what's likely to happen and what can happen. And if we understand that most people today are distracted by this device, that most people today are more concerned about some of these stimulants. Most people today may not have the best sleep, may not have the best diet. Now we can understand that many of these people are going through inhibited. And so again, this person that may seem rude to this group of people in Japan because they're not staying in the same place, but if their face is glued to their phone and they're more concerned about what's going on social media, then it doesn't justify the behavior, but at least we have an indication as to why they're doing it, as opposed to it being this overt rudeness. Again, ignorance. Having said that, it should help us all understand that you have to have situational awareness to have any capacity to have any kind of self-awareness as well.
You have to have that in order to have a healthy society, or a functioning society, at least. There's always a kind of, I remember walking through the subway station in Japan. I think it was in Kobe, Kyoto. Well, anyway, I mean, it was a mass of people. The population density there is considerably higher than most places in the United States. And it was fascinating just walking through the subway station because there was this palpable awareness of self and other. So two people are coming towards each other, not on a path, just in a mass of people. One would pause, let the other one by, then the next one behind that one would pause and let the first one by. And I was, I was a college student, and I picked up on this because it wasn't something I was particularly familiar with, walking down the street in a typical American town, a group of people walking down the sidewalk with no awareness that they're taking up the entire sidewalk and that individual pedestrians are either going to have to step into the gutter or get plowed over. We really, I think, I feel that we really do need that sense of where we are in relationship to others, and that sense of responsibility as well as consideration, how my actions are going to affect those around me.
What happened? I'd be curious, after you were there for a while, what happened to your behavior? Did you change your behavior a bit?
Well, I was only there 5 days, but I think I became much more conscious of it. I mean, especially when I saw the contrast between some of my peers and the surrounding culture. That really made me not want to be representing my country as a culture that was lacking in social sensitivity.
Yeah, because to me that's an important distinction, right? Like Jason said, some of these behaviors aren't illegal, and no one came and lectured you on it. It was society, I guess, in that case, was sending a signal to you of how you should behave, right? And what you should do without anyone telling you should do this.
Yeah, and it's I remember noticing, pick up little things on the subway car. The overhead light fixtures had finger latches on them. They weren't to replace the bulbs. They weren't. You didn't have to take screws in and out. You just little clip. And I just remember noticing that and thinking, I wonder how long that would last on an inner city or a metropolitan city subway line. But apparently it wasn't an issue. There was just a sense of respect for the facilities that are available for all of us. And even then, this was when was I there? 81. The tickets were entirely on the honor system. You went to a machine, you bought your ticket, you got on the subway. You didn't get checked, you didn't have to swipe. The culture apparently was such that people simply wanted to do the right thing.
Yeah, is it? You think it's a little like broken window syndrome? I mean, when those not familiar, when there's an abandoned house and people leave it alone until one of the windows gets broken, and then everybody sees it differently, and there'll be more windows broken, and before long it's a house that's ransacked or becomes a drug house or whatever. I mean, that's the metaphor, but it's that messaging, right?
One of my favorite ideas, just holding up my book, Fix Your Broken Windows.
A great idea share and a promo all in one. That's great. Awesome.
But yeah, I mean, it goes back to that point that we've been talking about, the little indiscretions start to magnify. And that if the windows are broken, the neighborhood looks derelict, it's going to attract crime. When things look orderly, people tend to act in a more orderly way. And they say the same thing about the way you dress. This dressing down at work may not be the best idea for productivity. And we're all very comfortable. But when I dress up, or not even dress up, just when I dress in a professional manner, then I'm actually sending a signal to myself that I am a professional and that I conduct myself in a professional way.
It's that uniform, correct? It's this identity attached to it that we attach to it. I don't know one person who's done the martial arts that doesn't feel differently when they put on a gi or a uniform. a soldier when they're putting on their uniform, putting on their body armor, the samurai before they would go on campaign. There was very much a ritual attached to this. Not so much in the ritual itself physically, but in what that meant to them and what it embodied for them, and then what happened thereafter. If you put on this uniform and we're acting professionally, that encourages us to have those sort of ethos and to try to maintain that level of professionalism. But if wearing a t-shirt and shorts discourages that, then by all means we should discourage that behavior as well.
Yeah, it actually speaks to, I wear a yarmulke, and the word yarmulke it's a Yiddish word. It's a hybrid of the Hebrew phrase yira de malka, which means fear of the king. And it's a way for observant Jews to remind ourselves at all times that we are standing in the presence of the King of the universe. And that calls on us to act with a certain decorum, a certain dignity, a certain self-respect, self-presentation, and all the more so when I go outside in public and people see me, and something gets me upset and I feel like snapping at the next person I see, and I remember, better not do that, because I'm not just an anonymous person. I'm wearing a uniform, and I don't just represent myself. I represent my team, and I represent the coach.
I think you bring up a good point there in terms of ethics, that if I think ethics is supremely important, because let's say, you're wearing a yarmulke to respect the King of the universe. If one believes there is no King of the universe, then ethics does not matter, potentially, because why can't I do what I want to do and throw a wrench in whatever gears there are, because the gears are all made up? And why can't I make up my own rules? However, and I think what you're seeing perhaps culturally when you talk about Japan has a culture of respect, and part of that culture of respect is the past, that potentially we are being looked upon, watched over in some ways. We have the respect for elderly because they know something that perhaps young folks don't, and so we take that culture takes special care, and I wonder to what degree, if there is King of the universe, and if this container of life is not all there is, does that change, and does that elevate the need to look at departures versus arrivals and a respect for the other person? Because what is it to me to take an additional 10 minutes to wait perhaps in departures instead of arrivals? It does that long-term outlook elevate that micro that we were talking about, the fact that I should take more care now because of the long term, and if there is no long term, then the care now doesn't matter.
We don't want to get too theological in this program, but you actually did touch on something that was on my mind, because when I went with my neighbor out onto the departure platform, I was aware that I am identified as a Jew. And the outside chance that somebody sees me and thinks, oh, look at those Jews, they don't think they have to follow the rules. That was very much on my mind. In terms of accountability, if there is an ultimate authority that I'm responsible, theoretically, that makes it much easier for me to follow the rules. Clearly, it's not a guarantee, because otherwise every religious person would be living a pristine life, and we know that doesn't work, because we have the power to rationalize and we have our various impulses. But there's also that social pressure, to act in a way that people will find offensive, or distasteful. It's not in my own self-interest to do that if I want to fit in with the rest.
Well, kind of the root of it is that the idea of the golden rule, which remarkably, there are so many people nowadays that if you ask them what the golden rule is, they wouldn't know. I was taught the golden rule in school as a kid. So why should I care about departures and arrivals and the thousands of other people that are at the airport? And I do. I'm one of the people who I do care, because I don't want to I can play by the rules because I don't want to offend all the other people. I don't want to make it harder for them. I want to respect the fact that somebody laid out that airport well. I don't have to be happy about it, but I'm going to respect it.
And to touch on what Jason and you also touched on, Rabbi, which you said you didn't really necessarily want to go in a theological direction, but since we're here and we're playing devil advocate, does a person have to believe in a higher power to have ethics, to be tethered to something that gives them that idea? Can an agnostic or an atheist still feel an ethical obligation to do the right thing, as opposed to having this mentality of going out and raping and pillaging and just being all out for themselves?
I think they can, and many do, but I don't know that there's a moral imperative unless you believe in some absolute authority. There's when I was in college, I was very enamored with Eastern philosophy, although I never studied it deeply enough to really be able to claim to be a serious student of it. But the idea that when I behave in a way that is elevated, I am aligning myself with the forces of the universe in a way that benefits the universe and benefits me. I mean, there has to be some sort of an awareness. There's a higher element for that, and that works with a creator, without a creator. And I think the same kind of philosophy would be a pragmatic approach. I'm going to have a better life if I get along with the people who share the world that I live in, simply because we're not going to have an adversarial or a disrespectful relationship. It's better for us all to get along with each other. That doesn't mean I compromise my principles. It doesn't mean that I don't watch out for my own self-interest. The biblical command, love your neighbor as yourself, implies that you have to love yourself first. Because if I'm not taking care of myself, then I can't be taking care of other people. So we clearly understand that in a theological context, but the same principle, I think, applies out of self-interest. It's if I can't get there through altruism, then at least I can get there by recognizing that selflessness can be selfish, in the sense that I come out ahead when I take into account the needs of others.
Well, and for those that are saying, well, aren't there people that believe in higher powers that do bad things? Of course, but having that there as a deterrent, if nothing else, to reinforce, to base that upon the foundation of everything else that you're doing, at least it gives us a fighting chance, as opposed to just this mentality of anarchy and chaos, and I'm just trying to grab what I can while I'm here.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was actually one of the experiences, and I'm not going to go into any details, but one of the experiences I had when I was toying with the idea of becoming religious, because I believe that you don't need belief in a higher power to be a good person. And I found myself in a situation where my personal values came up against immediate temptation, and the values just went straight out the window. It wasn't even a contest. And it was a very disconcerting moment for me, because I really believed in the values that I had developed for myself. And I found that they had very little influence when I wasn't sufficiently motivated to keep them.
I think that's takes it back to the importance of any rule or philosophy has to make sense, right? Like, just like saying departures and arrivals, we got to go there. It has to make sense why that is for people, whether they have an explicit moral compass or, like you said, Johnson, they just see the overall benefit to themselves. I mean, we all know it's probably not a good society to live in if we all raped, pillaged, and robbed, right? I mean, we know that. And so it makes sense not to do that, even if you don't have a moral code, beyond that. But same thing with any of the processes or rules or things that we have. It has to make sense to someone and say to them, oh, this is not necessarily right and wrong as much as this is what they're saying is right, and that makes sense to me.
And there's a lot of trust that comes in there
Mm-hmm.
because, if I'm not an expert on traffic flow or anything else, when I go to the doctor and he says, take this blue pill, and I say, I want to take the red pill, I'm a red pill guy. What do I know about medicine? I'm not in a position to have an informed opinion, so I have to trust my doctor. If I don't trust this doctor, I should find a different doctor. But, this could be a whole other program as we're winding things up now, that, we're living in a society that's increasingly distrustful. We don't trust our leaders. We don't trust conventional wisdom. We don't trust traditional values. And so it becomes a kind of a free-for-all. And now, why should I conform to any conventions? Because I don't have confidence that those conventions are actually put in place for my best interest. Some arbitrary person wanted to do it this way, and I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah, the rules don't make sense. I mean, it goes back to
Or I
saying
don't see the
see the
sense
value,
in
yeah.
them.
But that's, I think, Jason's point about it's incumbent on both sides of the equation to act ethically. So design a system that either works appropriately or convey those ideas and help people understand this is why we want to do this. And then the converse, of course, is to use it.
And to ask questions. This doesn't appear to make sense. When I was taught in high school, inevitably the first day of any year, I'd hear, that makes no sense. And I'd say, what you mean is you don't understand it. That's the same thing. No, it's
Right.
not. Well, after a few weeks, if any students said that makes no sense, I had the rest of the class jumping on them. You mean you don't understand it? And I consider that a major victory. It's a simple mental switch. It puts the burden on us to make the effort to understand first before we jump to conclusions.
It goes back to the old saying, and there's a whole story that goes along with it, which I'm not going to repeat, but the end of it is, don't move the fence until you know why the fence is there. And to this point of, do you need to have some higher power or something like that we are ethically responsible to, accountable to, perhaps. Accountability is nothing if it's not accountable to someone.
Mm-hmm.
You got to figure out who that is. That can be accountable to me, could be accountable to somebody else, could be accountable to a higher power. I want to just add this to what Marcus was saying or asking. There are certain things that are universal across all cultures. For instance, a smile. A smile communicates the same thing in every culture. There are also other principles like respect. There is a concept of respect in every culture. How that respect works itself out, who you are respectful to, that's up for grabs. But there is a universal culture of respect, whether a person believes or professes a belief in something or not. It is simply how we work that out. So someone who says, hey, I have some sort of higher power, and because of that, I need to be respectful to you. And I'm perhaps believe I'm going with the order of the universe. And that's going to be if you want to ride a wave, you ride with it, not against it. So maybe I believe I'm riding with that wave. And someone else says, well, I want to be respectful, so I appear respectful, so I can maintain position or power. All right. The same principle is there. And I think, to Rabbi's point, I love this pendulum of the pendulum of generations or circumstances. If there's value, I think there's a lot of value in being at a place where we must question what we believe. And if we lose trust, if we lose respect, take it back to the question, why do I have this motivation in me to go to departures or arrivals? And I think at the root of that, there is a tremendous amount of growth. Whatever conclusion you come to, there's a tremendous amount of growth that can be had simply by going down that path.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap up on, although you do remind me of some of the well-trodden, using my metaphors, often heard phrases from politicians. You know, mistakes were made. I always like that one. Yeah. Who made them? Well, I don't know. I take responsibility, yes, and what exactly are the repercussions of that? And that is also part of the trust issue. But I think we've wrap it up at this point. If you're listening or watching and you're enjoying the conversation, this podcast is available to everybody on various platforms, including my Substack. And for paid members, the second segment, Backstage Pass, will be available too. So feel free to join up over there. In the meantime, Marcus Aurelius Anderson, David Marlow, Jason Todd, thank you for your thoughts, your insights, your conversation. And again, those of you who are watching or listening, if you have an idea you'd like us to take up, a challenge you'd like us to take up in a future episode, please go to my website, Ethics Ninja, use the contact information, submit your idea. If it's compelling, we will definitely take it up. And until then, as always, encourage you to continue grappling with the gray.